Hello everyone, Darrington Press has announced an update to the Daggerheart open beta playtest system to version 1.3. They talked through some of the changes, so it took me a couple days to go through and see what I thought and redo some calculations. So I'm going to share with you what I feel like 1.3 is going to do to this game. The first thing is 1.3 already. The game's only been out about a month. It's been in playtest. And this response, I think, is an incredibly positive sign to me. I've seen a lot of gaming companies take a very long time to respond to feedback, and the cycle of making the changes, proposing them, playtesting them, convincing yourself that it's good enough to put out there usually takes a long time. I think they didn't try to make every single change. They just tried to make some things that needed to be changed better. So they did that right away. And that, to me, is an incredibly good sign for the health of the Daggerheart system going forward. It means that they have resources in place from a business standpoint. If you want to mobilize a change to a system like this in a couple of weeks, that means you've got resources available. The fact that Demiplane had the updates instantly also means that the communication there is excellent. So I think going forward, as the game updates come in, we can immediately see them on Demiplane. We can immediately update our characters to the new version. Old characters will be updated to the new text. So, yeah, I really was happy with the agility with which they rolled out this update. So, massive positive feeling about the health of the system. So, that said, if you want to actually check out their take on what they did, you can go watch the video. It's interesting, on one hand, they think they did a certain thing for the game, but I don't think some of these changes are really going to play out like they expect mathematically, but that doesn't mean that isn't what players will choose. So let's go through what it means. So in terms of ancestries and backgrounds, there's a few things that I've seen on the forums people talking about nerfs. They reduced the damage on ranged weapons, and I have to say, from that standpoint, good. We already talked about it in a prior video, but ranged attacking was very powerful to the extent that, having like a couple melee characters just to plug things up and then everybody else being ranged attackers was really a better solution. So now, with the reduced damage, it's less likely that the ranged attackers are going to be hitting high damage thresholds. However, there still are some weapons in the game that are pretty strong for ranged attacks. So, all in all, a few things were nerfed, but it's not too bad. I think it just brings things more in line with what's fair. Nerf to Ancestries. In general, I think the Ancestries are improved. The changes to Orc, for example, I think are very relevant in light of the changes to the thresholds that they've made. So thresholds got reduced, and then Orcs now, instead of giving you more chances to use your armor, actually give you more chances to reduce damage with your thresholds, which is interesting. So a lot of these changes are good. The Myconid change, I think, is also, or Fungrel, I guess. The Fungrel change is also good. Their old ability, I didn't understand what that was trying to do. So Fungrel's legit in this new version. So, yeah, I think Ancestries in general are player favored. More relevant powers on more characters. The Daemon change, it's borderline overpowered. It used to be that if you rolled fear, you could use a stress to prevent the GM from getting a fear. Now it's 2 stress to change the fear to a hope. Now, there's a bunch of stuff in the game that says if you roll with hope, certain things trigger. So being able to change a result with fear to a result with hope prevents the GM from getting the hope, gives you a hope, and potentially triggers really strong domain abilities. So I think anybody who's planning to build a character with a strong ability that says when you succeed with hope, something else happens, if you really want to be able to manage the timing on that and control it, that change. And 2 stress is expensive. 2 stress is an expensive, let's say, resource expenditure. But yeah, the control that it gives you in the game, preventing the GM getting the fear, giving you hope, and triggering abilities seems I feel like that has to get nerfed. That's not a nerf. That's borderline overpowered. We'll see how it plays out. And Seaborne, I think, is now busted. That'll have to be changed. Every time you roll a fear, you get a marker on there, and then at some point you can trade those in for +1 to your rolls. Again, statistically, every +1 that you can get to a roll is relevant. They're either going to have to change this card, or they're going to have to start typing bonuses where you can roll and you can add your trait bonus to it, and then you can add one other bonus. So you can either use the D6 from advantage, you can use an experience, or you can use Seaborne, but all of those bonuses really need to be linked to a single bonus type that can't be duplicated. Because the only thing that the high-level monsters have going for them at this point is they have very high difficulties. So the big dragons and stuff like that in the game have difficulty 25, which even at top level, you get a +5. Maybe you can trigger another +5 from somewhere. With a +10, you're still statistically behind the curve of an average of 13. You'd have to roll 15 or better at that point to beat their difficulty class. Well, with all these untyped bonuses coming to the game, and now the Seaborne thing just says for that one hit that you must land, or that one skill that you must roll, and it could be as strong as the amount of tokens that you have. And for characters that can generate out of combat rolls, either by searching or tracking or doing various things, and stack up 2 or 3. A +2 or a +3, just untyped, that you can use for free with no resource, really feels like it's going to be overpowered. I think that now is better statistically than Orderborn even, but that and Orderborn are now clearly the 2 best. Evasion. There was some comments about how Evasion was too strong and leather armor lost the +1 to Evasion. But Nimble and the other skills that give Evasion are still maintained. You can still level up Evasion in the same way as you level your character up. And it gets completely out of control. Your character becomes virtually unhittable at the highest levels of the game. And I think they have to do something with Evasion. Again, if it's that you can have Evasion and then you can have one bonus to Evasion, you could have something like Nimble that just adds to your Evasion all the time. That's fine. But you can't have Nimble adding to your Evasion and then also other skills that add on to that and take it sort of statistically off the charts. So I think Evasion's still really good, and it's, in my opinion now, better than armor by quite a chunk. The stress damage below the minor threshold for tanky characters who maybe don't have so much Evasion, the minor threshold change is going to help a lot. The fact that you don't take stress anymore, if you're below your minor threshold, you just don't take anything. That's going to be a big deal, but I still think Evasion is overbalancing armor. Given the enemy's advantage when you're full of stress is a pretty big mechanical change, but then they just gave one more stress slot. So basically, however your character worked before running 5 stress slots, it runs the same way. And it'll just be, you don't want to really mark that 6th slot. And again, you may have 5 slots marked and then, get into a situation where somebody forces you to take that last stress for some reason, either in combat or out of combat. But you basically don't want to intentionally use that last stress unless there's a really meaningful reason to do it. But it's okay. Since the small damage doesn't cause stress anymore, I do think it'll be more interesting with weapons like Bloodstaff, because you don't want to just keep using that in certain circumstances. The blood staff again causes stress after it does damage, so when you deal damage, you take a stress. So it's not your choice. With the hammer, there's a hammer that does the same thing, Hell's Maul or something like that. That you choose to use stress to upgrade the dice. Bloodstaff just does it, and then you take the stress when you roll damage. So there'll be some things like that I think are actually more powerful now, because you run through all your stress and then you can continue to use the weapon. Whereas with the hammer, you wouldn't want to choose to use your last stress unless you know you're going to get the kill for the combat. So a little bit of juggling, but overall about the same, since you get an extra stress slot anyway. In the action tracking changes, now when you roll with fear, the GM decides whether to take a turn or take fear. And for a success with fear, this is clear. You succeed with fear, the GM can either take that fear die or they can take a turn. But I don't know for sure what happens when you fail with fear. Here's how I think it works, and please leave in your comments below if you believe that it works differently. I think that if you fail with hope, well, obviously if you succeed with hope, you keep playing and none of this is relevant, right? If you fail with hope, the GM gets a turn. Because you failed, that passes the turn over to the GM. If you succeed with fear, that's the moment where the GM has to choose, I'll either take the fear die or I'll take the turn. And if you fail with fear, I think you still get both, right? So I can choose to take the fear, but then the GM will also get the turn because you failed. I believe that's the way it should work. But again, in the comments below, let me know. Because if you fail with fear and then you decide to take the turn and you have to give away the fear die, that is super punishing. Already success with fear and having to choose whether to take the turn or the fear is a big nerf to the power of the monsters in the game. And if you're faced with that choice on a fail with fear, it's devastating. Again, characters will succeed most of the time. So 2/3 of the time when fear is rolled, the GM will have a choice between the fear die and the turn. But I think if you fail with fear and the GM doesn't get both the fear and the turn, I don't know how combats feel dangerous anymore at that point. If your character is built at least a little bit optimally, it feels like combats tip even further in the favor of the characters now. The help action has changed now. When you help one of your allies, you roll a hope and they roll their duality dice, and they get to decide whether to use their hope die or your hope die. It's an interesting change to the mechanic. It reduces the chance of overall success compared to the old system. Giving advantage in the old system gave you plus on top. So statistically, the D6 on top is more relevant than 2d12 pick highest. But what it does do, it gives significantly increased chances that that hope will be higher. Okay, so it increases the chance to generate hope. It's almost 80%, and it almost doubles the crit chance. Basically, it doubles the chance to get a critical hit. Let's say you roll a 5 on your fear dice. You might roll a 5 and an 8 on your hope dice, but then you're always going to take the 5 because that'll match up with the 5 on the fear dice and give you a critical success. So in that sense, using hope or using help, really good. You use a hope to help an ally. You have almost 80% chance to regenerate that hope anyway. The ally will get it back instead of you, but basically you transfer a hope from yourself to somebody else. You double your crit chance, and most importantly, you're not generating fear. You're getting successes, you're getting them with hope, you're keeping the turn away from the GM. So I think the amount of times that you need to trigger the help action in combat is very high. I think players should be doing this just all the time. When you use the help action, it does not cost you an action. It specifically says this doesn't count as an action for you. So basically, if there's 5 players in your group and each one takes an action, it's possible for you to go around the table, and for every single action that one player takes, another player is helping them. And the amount of fear that gets generated gets reduced. The amount of failures gets reduced. And again, with the GM having to choose whether to take the fear dice or take the turn, there's not going to be many fear dice out there. There's not going to be many failures out there. I feel like the PCs are going to run through an awful lot of turns. So I think this is overdone. I think that the help action changes together with the changes to GM's fear has gone too far. So more armor slots with worse armor values. You can, in the game, it says you can mark as many armor slots as you want to reduce the damage. So if you had 9 armor before and you took 27 damage, you could simply mark 3 armor slots and reduce it by 27 and take 0. So there is the possibility of using armor multiple times. I felt like in the old system, you really only wanted to mark armor 1 at a time and control when you use it so that you can drop a hit point or 2 hit points depending on your character, and use that wisely. With the armor values being reduced now, instead of 9 armor starting out, you might only have 5 or maybe 6 or something like that. So you'll have to use more armor slots to reduce the same amount. The thresholds have been reduced, so any damage is going to be causing hit points of damage unless your character is specifically increasing the thresholds. So this is going to focus the attrition now into these little hits that are going to basically, whenever we take 1 hit point, we're just going to take it. Whenever we take 3 hit points, we might try to knock it down to 1 or none. But we'll build up a lot more armor damage, and a short rest only gives us 2 armor slots per short rest still. So basically, those 6 armor slots, for most characters, will need to last you all day. So you get more uses of them, but they don't heal any faster than they used to before. So if your GM's giving you 3 or 4 combats a day, this is going to be more attrition, and it's going to be harder to stay alive. If your GM's only doing a couple combats a day and you get 3 short rests, again, it's going to be easier for the characters. So overall, I think less total damage between the hope rule, the fear rule, and the armor. Everybody should stay alive really easily. Multiclassing in the game now gives the full character ability, and this took multiclassing from something that was, I don't know, in certain situations I was looking at it as, all right, I could multiclass, but it gives me partial abilities and it's not that great. But for a lot of characters, getting their full ability really makes it worth it. So now, when you do upgrade to multiclass, it takes both of your upgrade points for that level, but you get full access to that character ability, and you get full access to their domain foundation that you pick. So the character's ability itself is worth 1 point, the domain is worth another point, and that's a big sacrifice to make. You know, you can't upgrade traits or proficiency or anything else, but those are, a lot of builds are going to find now that multiclassing is worth it. It does give you access to another domain, but I believe that domain is still at half the level of your character. So if you, let's say, take warrior at level 6, it'll give you access to the bone domain. You could pick bone. You can only pick one of the domains from that character, and then you can only take cards that are half your level rounded up. Still very powerful, and I think just getting access to certain low level, like nimble, if you want to take nimble and you have a good agility on your character and grab that evasion, so that could be like a level 6 upgrade. Take warrior, take bone, take nimble. You get the warrior ability to add damage. You get whatever subclass you pick, and also, you know, a good domain card on top of it. So Multiclassing is now legitimate, and it's going to be a decision between, do I want to go all the way up to my level 3 specialization in my class, or can I get more power out of multiclassing? And I think many characters will get more power out of multiclassing than they will out of their third tier subclass ability, which it could mean that third tier subclass abilities will need to be improved, especially for some characters. They're really weak, some classes. But overall, I feel like even for straight characters, sometimes it was borderline not worth it. So it's good. So here's an example. You're thinking of upgrading your thresholds. Maybe you're playing a warrior and you want to upgrade your thresholds. There's no reason that you wouldn't just multiclass then into Guardian, take Stalwart. That gets you +2 to all your thresholds, plus the abilities from Guardian, the abilities from Stalwart. So if you have multiclassing available and you don't need your third tier, you would always just multiclass into Guardian instead of increasing your threshold. If you wanted to upgrade your armor slots, you could upgrade to Wizard Warcaster. Warcaster gets a free armor slot as one of the Wizard features. And then they get to pick a die, and every time they roll a die, they get to clear stress. So you get a super powerful mechanic. You still get the armor upgrade slot. You get a subclass that can add to your damage when you roll fear. You get to do extra damage. So these multi-classes now offer really a strong mechanic. Warrior, Seraph, Ranger, Guardian, Bard, they're all really powerful picks for just about any class you want to play. I think Seraph, depending on what flying means in the game eventually, I think Seraph could be a really strong pick for a lot of classes. Again, put in the comments down below what you think flying means. What I've settled on is flying just is a storytelling thing. The only mechanic I think could be legitimate for flying, when you're moving long distances across the battlefield, you have to make an agility roll, basically to weave your way through combat and successfully get where you want to go. I think maybe with flying, you just say, look, if all you want to do is move on your turn, you can fly above all that stuff and skip the agility roll. You still put an action on the action tracker. You just move your character, but you don't have to roll the agility. I can't think of much else that flying does except, to say, well, you can't be in melee with a character on the ground if you're flying up in the air, kind of as a storytelling mechanic. But it really doesn't say anything that I can find in the rules about what flying means. So other than the storytelling mechanic of the dragon is flying and you can't hit it in melee, what does it mean to you guys? What do you think it is? And if flying is really as strong as it could be for storytelling purposes, then the Seraph being a taxi becomes a very interesting mechanic for a lot of characters. Support characters, or let's say you're a damage character and you want to take your tank. You just hook them up and become a taxi. Anyway, multiclassing is a thing now. It's legit. The builds that I've done so far on this channel are still working as intended. There's nothing in this update that changes it drastically. I think the Wizard still looks the same. The Evasion Ranger still works virtually the same, except you don't get the evasion from the armor. And none of the class changes make it so that the classes don't work out. So anything here looks like it's going to be fine. Future builds are going to look more at stress management, I think, especially when you have a domain skill that allows you to manage stress. That's a good resource. And again, we don't want to use our last stress slot. So if we have something that will allow us to de-stress, that's good. And healing did get better. I think there's a lot more opportunity to either use one instance of armor, or none, take 1 damage and just let it go. So going into a short rest, for example, a lot of characters might have 1 or 2 damage, and you can use your ability to help others heal if you're a support character. Bards being able to heal 1 hit point on everybody seems like that got better in the new system. Overall, I think the 1.3 changes favor players way too much. I think it's even easier now to win in combat, to feel heroic, and for the monsters to have not much of a chance. Controlling stress and healing hit points are more relevant, so it's a little bit more of a juggling act there, especially if you're having more combats in a day that you have short rests. I think it becomes more interesting. The fear nerf for GMs, I think, is really significant. I think that together with the changes for hope really, I don't know. What I thought of is basically if there's out-of-combat rolls that generate fear, that maybe a GM could stack up more fear going into a combat, trade some of those in for action tokens, get into the game that way. But with the help action, even with out-of-combat rolls, somebody can help. The likelihood that PCs are going to be generating fear out of combat is significantly reduced. 1 out of 5 rolls now is going to give fear if everybody's helping like they should be. So, I think the help action is a little too good, but we'll see how it plays out. Maybe we'll get some changes to that in 1.4. All right, so that's going to wrap up my conclusions for the Open Beta 1.3 playtest for the Daggerheart system. Thank you all for tuning in. Leave it in the comments down below. Let's have a community discussion, what you guys think this means, and hope to see you in the next one.